Bluff. It wasn't the first time I'd made the voyage, by a very long way. My job being Eastern Telegraph Company, I was familiar with it all, from the first confusion of going on board amid much clanging of bells and falling over luggage, through the increasing heat, the disentangling of personalities, the mushroom growth of shipboard scandals and jokes, love affairs, feuds, and friendships, to the final arrival in Singapore docks, with the tender drawing away from the ship's side to the customary accompaniment of cheering and waving. On almost every sea voyage, 3 or 4 personalities always stand out from amongst the rest. This time, Miss Christie had been the most talked about person on board, and with good reason, for she was exceptional in one or two ways. To begin with, she was quite extraordinarily pretty. Her brilliant English fairness, her light blue eyes, and curly blonde hair would have been noticeable, even at home. As it was, of course, she was trebly conspicuous amongst the other women, most of them already past early middle life, bleached and saddened by continuous years in the tropics and eternally torn in two between a husband abroad and children at home. It so happened that there were only 2 other unmarried girls amongst the first-class passengers, besides Claire Christie. One of them, Mary Lewis, was traveling with a shrewish mother, who dominated the girl body and soul, and the other one, a globe-trotting little American from New York City, was bright and amusing, a good dancer, but definitely plain. Claire Christie was beautiful. She had charm, intelligence, and whatever she did well, singing, bridge, dancing, deck games, conversation, the usual degree of board-ship flirtation. Actually, she was, so she said, going out to marry the man she was engaged to, resident in one of the Malay states. He was to come and meet her at Singapore, where the wedding would take place. Once or twice I heard the other women wondering, amongst themselves, why she hadn't brought a friend, or an older relation, out with her. She wasn't an orphan. She talked quite a lot about her parents and their place near Birmingham. One had deduced, somehow, that she was an only child and that the father and mother were rich. She was 25 years old. Almost everybody liked her, even the 2 other girls, for she had a very gentle, appealing manner and did small, kind, unselfish things very readily. By the time the ship had reached port said, we all felt as if we'd known one another for years. Even the passengers who had joined at Marseilles, and at whom we'd all looked resentfully, viewing them as upstarts and interlopers, had found their places and asserted themselves as being part of the little world in which we were to live for the next 3 weeks. There were the usual number of planters, most of them with wives and children, and 1 or 2 government officials, a well-known novelist who was traveling in search of local color, the accustomed complement of nonentities, and Teddy Reed, going to take up a job in Colombo. Reed was the person, there's usually one on every voyage, whom we'd all decided that we disliked. Even the fact that Claire Christie acknowledged him as an old acquaintance and was kind to him couldn't save him. Everyone merely said how angelic it was of her to put up with the little bounder. For he was, although not in any blatant way, a little bounder. A spiritual bounder, so to speak. His clothes and his table manners and his vocabulary had nothing the matter with them, none of those singularities that we associate with the word bounder, but his outlook and his personality, and his ill-concealed eagerness to be thought well of by everybody, struck one disagreeably from the start. He was a small man, slim and insignificant-looking, with fair hair that always lay with abnormal smoothness against his narrow head, and long thin fingers of which he was vain, and to which he continually drew attention by casually introducing the subject of hands. He played the piano, most inaccurately, by ear. I am no performer myself, and to be able to play the piano, even inaccurately, is a social asset on a sea voyage, but even Claire Christie, who played as well as she did everything else, admitted that Reed's dreadful little boastings, veiled in self-deprecation of his dreadful little accomplishment, got badly on her nerves. Someone asked her if she knew anything about Reed's past. He had given various accounts of himself as a freelance journalist, a tremendous antiquarian, a bohemian amongst bohemians, and even a man about town, and we all knew, long before the ship left port said, That Reed was one of those unfortunate natural liars in whom the truth, apparently, is not. Claire Christie said, after a moment's hesitation, I don't know much about him, really. He was secretary, for a time, to our member. I used to meet him there a year or two ago, and he had lunch at our house, once or twice, I think. Then he left, and I don't think I know what happened to him next. Been in prison, perhaps, someone suggested facetiously. Or in the Secret Service. Or giving Pierrot concerts on the East Coast. Don't, said Claire, laughing all the same. Poor little creature, he really isn't so bad. I believe he was quite a good secretary. He told me the other day that he's taught himself to write shorthand, and that he could take it down at the rate of 210 words a minute, said the American girl in a voice of scornful incredulity. Young Howard, of the Colonial Service, looked up for a moment from his book. That's a pretty high speed, he said quietly. Our very best clerk in the office at Colombo doesn't reckon to do anything like that. Let's set Mr. Reed a test, maliciously suggested Mrs. Lewis, the young-looking widow who was traveling with her daughter. Somebody else giggled. Oh, could we? Of course, why not? If he does it all right, then he covers himself with honor and glory, which he'll enjoy, and if he can't, why then it serves him right for swonking. Isn't it rather a shame? Protested Claire, although her blue eyes were laughing and dancing as she spoke. He's brought it on himself, I pointed out, for I disliked Reed quite as much as everybody else, and had, moreover, a sneaking curiosity to see how he would get out of the difficulty. It wasn't, certainly, a very kind or generous attitude of mind, but the voyage had been extraordinarily dull and uneventful, except, I suppose, for the people who were in love with Claire Christie, which I wasn't. I had purchased my immunity, expensively enough, during a hot weather season in Hong Kong, 10 years before. Besides, she wasn't my type. Too sophisticated and cool, for all her gentleness. Mrs. Lewis was chattering animatedly. I know. We'll say we want to get up a ship's magazine, it's often done, and then somebody must dictate something, very fast indeed, and ask him to take it all down, and then transcribe it. Isn't that the proper term? And the purser or somebody will get it typed out for us. But who's going to dictate something, very fast indeed, out of their own head? Protested the American girl, opening her eyes very wide. Oh, Mrs. Lewis was clearly nonplussed, but she rallied at once. Why, Mr. Howard, of course. He's quite used to dictating. Howard shook his head. Not that kind of thing, anyway. Besides, it's too hot. I haven't any brains. You do it, Mummy, suggested her daughter, who had evidently been trained to believe her parent all accomplished. I couldn't, darling. No, the thing would be, I believe, to get Mr. Leslie to do it. Leslie was the distinguished novelist. Oh, what a splendid idea. Of course. He'd be the very man. But would he? We can but ask, a youthful tea planter remarked optimistically. The question is, who's going to bell the cat? Said Mrs. Lewis, laughing gaily. I won't, I know. I'm much too frightened of you clever people with brains. Claire can ask him. He'll do anything for her, said the tea planter confidently. Several voices acclaimed the suggestion. Oh yes, that's splendid. Claire can explain the whole thing and get him to agree. Come on, Miss Christie, don't fail us. We count on you, remember. She laughed and protested. No, I couldn't. Besides, I'm not at all sure that I want to see the poor little man shown up. That proves that you know he isn't speaking the truth, said the American girl quickly. Howard snorted. Even Miss Christie's kindness has never denied plain facts. Look out, hissed Mary Lewis between her teeth. Reed was coming round the corner, straight towards our group. He always walked with an absurdly long stride, as if to compensate for the fact that he was undersized and puny. He smiled brightly as he came up to us. No one, excepting Claire Christie, responded. Heard about the concert? He inquired genially. Oh Lord, are we in for that? Said Howard, purposely ungracious, I felt certain. Teddy Reed instantly veered round, as he always did, to the point of view that he suspected of being the popular one. I suppose it's inevitable, isn't it? One never gets through a sea voyage without it, he rejoined, although I strongly suspected that he knew very little about sea voyages, except from hearsay. But it was part of his eternal posing, never to admit ignorance or inexperience about anything whatever. "Who's going to perform?" inquired the American girl, not without malice. Reed walked into the trap at once. "I believe, as a matter of fact," he said, with his self-conscious little laugh, "that I'm to fill up part of the program. I'm sure I don't know why. People seem to think that I ought to sing a couple of songs or so, and I've undertaken to vamp a bit at the piano, that kind of thing." There was a silence. Then Howard said, "I see," rather dryly, and resumed his book. Teddy Reed looked around the group. Like many very vain people, he was abnormally sensitive to atmosphere and clearly realized that the present one was unfavorable to himself. Smiling rather wistfully, his face was as expressive as that of a child, he murmured the catchword of the moment, "Well, see you later," and walked away. We all looked at one another, and somebody laughed shortly. Then Mrs. Lewis said, "Claire, you really must. The little horror has got to be taught a lesson. Get hold of Mr. Leslie and get him to say, in front of all of us, that he'd give anything for somebody to take down an article, or a story, or something, or a letter. That's better still. Then somebody else must say, 'Oh, what about Mr. Reed? He can do it easily, 210 words a minute,' and so on. As I said before, if Reed can do it, so much the better for him, and if he can't, well," she paused. "Yes," said Claire, "if he can't." "If he can't, he's convicted out of his own mouth," declared the widow smartly, "and let's hope it'll teach him a lesson. He needs it badly enough." "I agree," said the American girl. "Come on, Claire, be a sport. It all depends on you. No one else knows Mr. Leslie half as well as you do." That was true enough. Claire was the only woman on board of whom H.A. Leslie had taken any notice at all. "I think it's a shame," protested Claire. "It isn't. He's brought it on himself." They were all urging her. I didn't say anything. I was watching with a good deal of curiosity. Claire's reluctance was, I thought, genuine, and it surprised me a little because she'd never struck me as being particularly tender-hearted. But I felt pretty sure she'd yield in the end and do as they asked her. Sure enough, she did. The victory was hailed with cries of triumph. "Go now, Leslie's in the smoke room. There's no one else there." Laughing and hustling, half a dozen of them escorted her to the smoke room door, and she went inside. I heard no more of the scheme until after the ubiquitous bugle had summoned us to the dining saloon for lunch. I was at the same table as the Lewises, and Mrs. Lewis leant forward eagerly to catch my eye. "Mr. Benson, Mr. Benson. She's done it. Miss Christie has got H.A. Leslie too, you know what." The plot thickens. She was really rather intolerable. I made the shortest answer that courtesy permitted, and devoted my attention to haricot mutton out of a tin. In reality, I was sufficiently eager to see the little comedy played out to take advantage of Mary Lewis's information that Reed was to be asked to join them and H.A. Leslie for tea on deck. The Lewises and Claire Christie had established a prescriptive right to a certain corner, and it was there that the deck steward brought them a tea tray every afternoon. When I found my way there at 4 o'clock, quite a number of the passengers had assembled. The atmosphere was self-conscious to a degree. Reed, who, as I have said, was susceptible to atmosphere, seemed to be talking less than usual. I don't mean that he was ever voluble or noisily self-assertive, on the contrary. He spoke usually in a quiet little drawl, with an Oxford accent, but he seemed to be withdrawn from the group, almost as if waiting to find out what mood was the prevalent one, so that he might accommodate his own to it. The novelist, Leslie, his hat tilted well over his eyes, sat in a deck chair drawn up close to the one occupied by Claire Christie. She was looking particularly lovely, in a frock of some bright rose-colored material, with her beautiful hair uncovered. I wasn't surprised that Howard and one or two of the other men seemed unable to keep their eyes off her, nor that Leslie directed his conversation exclusively to her. Like most celebrities, he was fond of talking about himself. Everybody listened respectfully enough, and Teddy Reed, from time to time, threw in a word or two evidently intended to make it obvious that he had read, pondered intelligently, and profoundly appreciated the works of the author. Leslie took the inferred compliment to himself, as well as the implication of Reed's literary discernment, with coolness. Indeed, he so thoroughly ignored the little man that I began to wonder whether the projected expose would ever take place at all. Quite suddenly, however, Leslie unmasked his batteries. "By the way, Mr. Reed, I'm told you know something about shorthand writing." "Just a little," Reed admitted, smiling. "Pitman's, of course?" "Oh, of course. It's much the most widely used." "Is it difficult?" inquired Mary Lewis, with pseudo-innocence. "Well, I suppose it is, rather. Most people take 3 or 4 months to master it, I believe." Reed paused, and Mary obligingly asked the question for which he was patiently waiting. "How long did it take you?" "In point of fact, I passed the usual speed tests in rather a short time. A month, to be exact. I taught myself the theory and worked at it by myself, and then I got a teacher at one of the commercial colleges to give me a couple of tests." "And you passed them?" Claire Christie inquired, with deceptive gentleness. "Yes," said Teddy Reed simply. "I got up to about 220 words a minute, I believe." 1 or 2 people exchanged glances. "You're the very fellow I want," said H.A. Leslie, with a horrid heartiness. "I've got some notes here that I simply must get typed before we reach Colombo, so as to send them off by the first possible mail. No one on earth can read my writing." "I'm rather good at deciphering handwriting," Reed asserted. No, you wouldn't make head or tail of this. But if you'll just jot it down, and then write it out afterwards, the purser says he can get it typed for me all right. Of course, I'll be delighted, though I expect I'm a bit rusty. It's years since I've touched shorthand." "Not since you were with Sir Frederick Clay, the summer before last," suggested Claire Christie very gently. "Oh, I didn't do very much shorthand for Sir Frederick. Hardly any, in fact." "Still, you used to do some, I remember," Claire countered thoughtfully. "Mr. Leslie, let's hear you dictating." "Is it awfully indiscreet of me?" Mrs. Lewis exclaimed, with a very artificial air of innocence. "I've always so wanted to see a real author at work." Leslie smiled rather grimly. "Nothing easier, Mrs. Lewis, I assure you. My notes are here, and if the talented Mr. Reed will honor me with his attention." He paused, and everybody looked expectantly at Reed. The little man seemed to have turned several shades more sallow than usual. "I say, I'm really not sure how much shorthand I remember," he protested feebly. "It's such ages since I've done any. And it's a thing one forgets so very easily if one doesn't practice it regularly." "But surely, if you could do 220 words a minute," said Mrs. Lewis, with simulated perplexity. "That was when I was doing it regularly." "For Sir Frederick, you mean?" Claire put in. "Yes, or rather, well, I did more before I was with Sir Frederick, not so much with him," stammered Reed. It was evident that he was getting badly rattled and more than suspected a trap. Much as I longed to kick the little blighter, I was beginning to feel that the baiting had gone far enough. Leslie, however, was ruthless. Never mind," he said breezily. "I shan't go as quickly as all that. Just take it down at your best speed, and let's see what you make of it." Relentlessly, he handed a pencil and pad across to Reed, and pulled an untidy sheaf of notes from his own pocket. "Ready?" The Lewises and 3 or 4 others were pressing forward, their eyes fixed on Reed. He swallowed hard once or twice. The novelist began to dictate in a loud, rapid voice. Whether he had prepared the stuff on purpose or not, I have no idea. But it was something amazingly dull and full of amazingly technical expressions that, as far as I remember, were principally concerned with the law of international copyright, and every other word at least seemed to be 4-syllabled. Leslie spouted it forth at tremendous speed, never pausing for more than an instant to take breath. Reed had the pad on his knee, his head was bent over it, and one hand was curved round the paper as though to conceal it from the onlookers. The other hand, grasping the pencil, was moving jerkily up and down, backwards and forwards. It seemed to me, although it was impossible to make certain, that every now and then he was frantically scribbling down words in longhand. It was, at all events, abundantly evident that he was finding it almost impossible to take down more than about 1/3 of the sentences that were being hurled at him by the novelist. For about 5 breathless minutes, he stuck to it. They must have seemed more like 5 hours to him. Then he raised his face, and I could see the sweat shining on his upper lip and little dents coming and going at the corners of his nostrils. I'm so frightfully sorry, but I'm not feeling quite up to the mark, the heat I expect. He closed his eyes and put back his head. Certainly, he was a ghastly color. Put your head down, not up, if you're feeling queer, said H.A. Leslie sharply. Right down, between your knees, man. Reed obeyed, and for a moment there was silence, whilst he sat with his small, sleek head clasped in his hands, bending towards the deck. Young Howard was the first person to move. Well, that's that, I suppose, he remarked cryptically, and got up and walked away. Mrs. Lewis, I am sure, was disappointed and perhaps rather skeptical, too, but she had evidently made up her mind that a display of either feeling would be out of place. She said, "It's a touch of the sun, I expect." Poor Mr. Reed. Is there anything I can do? There wasn't, of course. And after a few more ejaculations she, too, moved away, followed by her dutiful Mary. I looked at Claire Christie, and for one fleeting second caught an expression on her face that she had, I am very sure, never consciously shown to any of her admirers. Her mouth was drawn into a hard line, her brows close together, and if ever I saw contempt and anger pouring from a woman's eyes, I saw them then. I experienced, in that flash of time, a curious feeling of surprise, not at the revelation of Claire's personality that I had just received, that, somehow, did not astonish me in the least, but that she should find Teddy Reed worth it. The look was gone, in one instant, but not, as it happened, before Reed had seen it. He raised his head and met her eyes in full, and his own face grew livid. "Are you feeling better?" said Claire coolly. She got up without waiting for an answer, and then, stooping swiftly, picked up the pad with the unlucky shorthand notes that had fallen onto the deck. I saw Reed make a futile gesture, as if to stop her, and then let his hand drop by his side again. Claire looked at the page she held, and I wondered if some scathing comment would fall from her. Nothing would have surprised me less, after that look on her face. Actually, what did happen seemed to me more cruel than any jibe. She raised her eyebrows mockingly, and then handed the pad back to Reed with a laugh that must have cut his wincing vanity like the lash of a whip. Then, without a word, she walked away. I lacked the presence of mind to follow her example. Instead, I said politely, "Will you have a drink, Reed?" "I'm going to, and it'll do you good." "Thanks," he said. "Thanks, I think I will." I signed to a passing steward and ordered 2 double stangas. We sat in perfect silence until they came. But when Reed had swallowed his drink, after the manner of a man who needs it badly, he suddenly began to talk. "I'm afraid I made a bit of a fool of myself just now," he said with nervous eagerness. "The fact is, I've been feeling off color all day. I'm not a very strong man, you know. A bit of a heart, as a matter of fact, though I don't ever say anything about it." He paused, eyeing me rather apprehensively, as though in some doubt as to whether I should believe him. As a matter of fact, I felt perfectly certain that he had that moment invented his heart, and the pity that he had inspired in me a few moments earlier underwent an abrupt revulsion. I said nothing at all, and Reed swallowed once or twice and went on talking. I ought to have told Mr. Leslie at once that I was feeling seedy and that I'd do his notes for him another time. Only the ladies seemed keen about the idea of hearing him dictate then and there, and I didn't like to make a fuss. Besides, I thought I could go through with it all right. I'd no idea I was going to turn queer like that. "What sort of a hand did you make of the dictation?" "Oh, a bit of a mess, I'm afraid," Reed muttered uneasily. I held out my hand for the pad, and after a moment's hesitation he let me have it. The thing was a horrid jumble of shorthand outlines, truncated words in longhand, and unintelligible abbreviations. It was doubtful whether anybody in the world could have made sense of it. "Our friend's dictation was a bit too much for you," I suggested, to give him a chance. "Well, of course, I'm utterly out of practice," as I told them. "And shorthand is a thing you want to do every day, regularly, if you're to keep up any speed at all." "I see." Reed looked thoroughly uneasy, although he had regained his color, and I could almost see him revolving in his own mind what he should say next to make it sound better. I had no wish to hear anything more from him at all, and I got to my feet just as Mrs. Lewis came up to us. "Better now, Mr. Reed?" "Yes, thanks. It must have been a touch of the sun, I think." I heard their first sentences as I walked off. It hadn't taken Reed long, I reflected grimly, to get rid of his heart trouble and to substitute a touch of the sun. For the remainder of the day, I played bridge and dismissed the objectionable Reed and his troubles from my conscious mind. At dinner, however, the indefatigable Mrs. Lewis tried to reopen the subject. "I'm sure that faintness was only a put-up job," she declared. "We ought to make him own up to it." Nobody else responded. The joke had gone far enough, if it could be called a joke at all, and I changed the conversation pointedly. Of course the story of Reed's discomfiture spread, as stories of any kind always do spread on board a liner. I heard it being discussed, in snatches, up on deck that evening. Reed himself put in no appearance, either at dinner or afterwards, although there was dancing, and he was an enthusiastic and not unskillful dancer. Claire Christie spent the evening with the infatuated tea planter. I watched her once or twice as she danced with him and could almost have made myself believe that I had only imagined the hard, contemptuous expression that I had seen flash into that lovely, serene face of hers. We were nearing Colombo, and it was a breathlessly hot night. I stayed up on deck late, and so did 3 or 4 other people. Claire and her tea planter were amongst them. I caught sight of the flounce of her white lace frock in a particularly secluded corner long after most of the passengers had gone either to the smoke-room or to their cabins. It was past 1 o'clock when I got up, stretched myself, and moved almost automatically to the ship's side, drawn by the eternal fascination of the green, glassy waves through which we were so smoothly and steadily cutting our way. It was a perfectly still, breathless, moonlight night. I had lost myself and all sense of my surroundings in one of those vague, formless dreams that scarcely amount to conscious thought, when I became aware, although I could not have told by what process, that disturbance was in the atmosphere. It was not a question of noise. The murmur that reached me was low and quite indistinguishable. Nevertheless, the calm of the tropic night was threatened. That much I knew for certain, even before I turned, instinctively, to the place where I had last seen that betraying flounce of white. Claire Christie was on her feet, the young planter, his name was Woodward, I remember, standing close beside her, and facing them was the small figure of Reed. Even at a distance, I discerned something queer about him. He was swaying, slightly but unmistakably, and his hands were thrust into his pockets. I remember wondering whether he was the worse for drink. Almost as the thought came into my mind, he raised his voice, and the first sound of it was enough to put the question beyond any possible doubt. "I don't understand what you mean. I didn't suggest this concert or organize it in any way. If I'm asked to take part in it, naturally I do. It doesn't matter to me, one way or the other." "Oh, yes it does, Teddy," Claire put in mockingly. I had never heard her make use of his Christian name before. "Oh, yes it does. Don't, please, pretend. You wouldn't be at all pleased if you'd been left out of the program. However, that doesn't matter. The point is that if I'm to sing, I shall choose my own accompanist." She turned round and saw me. "Mr. Benson," she called, not at all disconcerted. "Come and help to settle a dispute." "It's very late," was all I could think of, as I came up to where the 3 of them stood together. I was certain that Reed had been drinking too much, although I had never yet seen him indulge in anything more reckless than a dry martini just before dinner. The scene in the afternoon had upset him, I knew, and thrown him off his balance. Besides, he was exactly the type of man, timid and abstemious, and physically as well as morally weak, on whom a very small amount of drink would have a disastrous effect. Claire was speaking, coldly and without haste. "Mr. Reed, without consulting me, I may say, has arranged to play 2 accompaniments for me at the concert tomorrow night. He tells me that the whole thing is settled, by whom, unless it's himself, I really don't know." "You said you'd sing," Reed muttered. "Certainly. But surely I can decide for myself who is to accompany me at the piano." "I should hope so," broke in Woodward with an angry laugh. "It's extraordinarily good of you to sing at all, you know." He looked very young and earnest and foolish, standing staring at Claire in the moonlight. She smiled at him, rather absent-mindedly, I thought. Certainly, Woodward hardly seemed to be a real person just then. It was so evident that the true issue lay between Claire Christie and Teddy Reed. Reed was also staring at Claire, and there was a kind of unwilling fascination on his small, pallid face. I've often played your accompaniments before, Claire, he said hoarsely. She shrugged her shoulders. In the days when you took down shorthand at 220 words a minute, she suggested. Reed grew livid. He took a step forward, and his hands were clenched almost as though he would have struck her. What though that's enough, Reed, come and take a turn with me, I interposed. But at the same instant young Woodward broke in furiously. How dare you speak like that to a lady? I've a good mind, I said. Shut up, Woodward. Don't let's have a scene. I wasn't quick enough. Reed came close up to young Woodward and hissed between his teeth, like the villain in an old-fashioned melodrama. Mind your own business, Woodward. I've known Miss Christie very much longer than you have, and very much better, too. Then he swung round and faced the girl. Haven't I, Claire? The way in which he emphasized her Christian name was an impertinence in itself. Please don't call me by my name, she said icily, and turned her back on him. I think I'm going to bed. Good night. I say, began Woodward. She smiled at him very sweetly. Good night, my dear. If the gratuitous little familiarity was meant to madden Reed, it succeeded admirably. He broke away from the detaining grasp that I laid on his arm, and thrust himself between Claire and the companionway. You were ready enough to let me call you by your name 2 years ago, he incredibly exclaimed, his voice not raised, but trembling with fury and wounded vanity. And you were ready to promise me anything in the world when you got engaged to a wealthy man, if only I wouldn't let on that he wasn't the first one. Then Woodward struck him. One couldn't blame the boy, it was natural. Claire had presence of mind enough not to scream. She caught her breath sharply and then stood perfectly still, her head held very high, her eyes fixed on Reed. I got between the two men, but it was evident that Reed was not going to retaliate. He was shaking all over, although from nervous excitement, I imagine, rather than fear. How dare you do that? He stammered unconvincingly. Before Woodward could answer, I interfered. You're not yourself, Reed. You don't know what you've been saying, and tomorrow morning you'll have to apologize to Miss Christie. Meanwhile, the best place for you is your cabin. Come along. Look here, young Woodward began. I told him to keep quiet. Can't you see the fellow's been drinking? I asked, trying to render the words inaudible to Reed. He's insulted Miss Christie. You're not making things any better, you young fool, by working up a scene in front of her. You'd better apologize to her yourself. Woodward turned eagerly to Claire, already ashamed of himself. I'm frightfully sorry. But when I heard him speak to you like that, I simply saw scarlet. Never mind, said Claire in a low voice. He shall go down on his knees to you tomorrow, when he's sober. Reed, contriving to twist out of the grasp that I had laid on his shoulder, turned round again. You think I'm drunk, he said with a kind of indistinct solemnity, and so I am, perhaps, but I'm not too drunk to know what I'm saying. It's all quite true. Less than 2 years ago, she and I were secretly engaged. I gave her up because she wanted all the things that I couldn't have given her. This time I got hold of him under the arms and put my knee into the small of his back. If necessary, I should have kicked him down below. Claire herself stopped me. Just one moment, Mr. Benson, please. I want to tell you and Mr. Woodward at once that there isn't one word of truth in what you've just heard. As if we didn't know that, burst from Woodward, but she disregarded him altogether. Naturally, I should never have spoken of this, but now I'm forced to. She drew a long breath. It's true that I knew Mr. Reed at home. He was private secretary to our friend and neighbor, Sir Frederick Clay. He paid me some most unwelcome attentions. The end of it was that my father forbade him the house. And that is what he has twisted into the account you've just heard. She looked like a lovely statue in the moonlight, the steady scorn in her low voice reflected in her whole bearing. Reed, white and shaking, looked up at her and then collapsed altogether, allowing me to drag him away. He never spoke a word, and I pushed him into his cabin and shut the door on him. Then I went on deck again. Woodward had disappeared, and Claire Christie, on her way below, paused only to say a few words that she had evidently prepared beforehand. You understand that this is going to be as if it hadn't happened? I've made Mr. Woodward promise. Mercifully, that horrid little liar leaves the ship at Colombo. Of course, I shan't speak to him again. I bowed. It was difficult to know what to say. I ought to have taken up that line from the very first moment he came on board, she added, looking me full in the face. But I thought I'd give him a chance and that he'd take it for his own sake. He's so terribly anxious to stand well with everyone. Always, he'd never have given himself away as he has tonight if he hadn't been drinking. It was all very lucid and quite incontrovertible. I suppose so, I acquiesced. Of course, you may rely on my discretion, Miss Christie. Good night. Good night. And thank you, she added, with a dazzling smile. 36 hours later, Reed, looking ghastly, disembarked with the other passengers for Colombo. No one had seen him in the interval. He had remained in his cabin, and his steward reported that he was ill. So far as I know, he exchanged no farewells with anybody on board. The story of that scene on deck remained unknown to everyone except those who had taken part in it, and for the remainder of the voyage Woodward made all the running with the beautiful Miss Christie. There isn't any doubt that Reed was a liar, a boaster, a cad. The shorthand incident was only one of many. And Claire Christie was extremely lovely to look at. I've sometimes wondered whether it was her loveliness, taken in conjunction with Reed's very unattractive weaknesses of character, that weighted the scales so heavily in her favor. For after all, it was only one word against another. And she was undoubtedly a flirt, and Reed undoubtedly susceptible, and it would have been in keeping with his love of posing that he should see himself as having nobly relinquished her when, or if, he found himself thrown over, either because she had grown tired of him or because she had found somebody more to her liking. Her fiancé came down to meet her at Singapore, a big, splendid fellow, obviously very much in love. He asked me, I remember, if we had played any poker on the way out and declared that we ought to see his Claire play a poker hand. You mightn't think it, he added, with an adoring glance, but Claire's bluff is marvelous. She gets away with it every time. It left me wondering quite a lot.